So, given the virtual nature of this session, I think it's safe to assume we have attendees from several time zones. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this presentation about the role of the CDER Product Jurisdiction Team. But before I get into the really fun stuff, can we just talk for a minute about Brood X? Do any of you live in one of these states where the 17-year cicadas came out in force? I do. And let me tell you, their lifespan is only 4 to 6 weeks. They emerged in May, and they've largely died off in my area by now. But the nymphs, they will be hibernating and maturing for the next 17 years, just waiting to bring their noisy self back again. But okay, that's enough about cicadas. Let's move on to today's learning objectives. So today, we are going to learn about the cicada life cycle, and maybe hear some bad cicada jokes. Okay, that's enough of the bad jokes. I'm done. Here are our real learning objectives. First, I want you to understand the role of the CDER Product Jurisdiction Officer, or PJO. I want you to be able to describe the agency's assignment of combination products, and I want you to be able to identify best practices for interacting with CDER and the PJOs on combination products. So who are the CDER PJOs? Well, we're definitely not the Three Stooges, but if we are, I want to be Larry. He was the smart one, right? And okay, we are not the Three Amigos either. We are actually a team of 3, though. It includes myself, and then Kenya Brothers and Sharon Chang. And we can be reached at any time at CDER Product Jurisdiction at fda.hhs.gov. So what do we do? Well, we are the CDER focal point for any classification, jurisdiction, or combination product questions or issues. We are CDER's liaisons to the Office of Combination Products, or OCP, and we represent CDER on combination product and jurisdiction policies and procedures. Well, what does that mean? It means we work with OCP to develop guidance documents and regulations. We represent CDER level position in Intercenter working groups. We help sponsors clarify the regulatory pathway for products assigned to CDER, and we respond to numerous internal and external inquiries of all types. Now, I just mentioned OCP, and that refers to the Office of Combination Products. OCP is organizationally located in the Office of the Commissioner and is separate from the medical product centers. Each center then has their own product jurisdiction team, or PJO. OCP has the authority to assign an FDA center to have primary jurisdiction for both review of combination and single entity or non-combination products when that jurisdiction is unclear or in dispute. They are also the agency focal point for combination product issues for internal and external stakeholders, and they provide broad oversight responsibilities covering the regulatory life cycle of combination products. Let's do a quick compare and contrast of the roles of OCP and the center PJOs. And then let me just also note that while this slide says CDER PJO, you can pretty much substitute in CDRH and CBER PJO as well. And what you'll see here is that the difference is primarily in who we represent. OCP is a focal point for all of the centers, while the center PJOs are the focal point for their center stakeholders. And the PJOs are the liaisons to the Office of Combination Products in helping them carry out their roles. Now, I would like to take you through the life cycle of a cicada. Okay, I'm just kidding again. I'm actually going to use the cicada life cycle as a template for the life cycle of a combination product in CDER. The first step is the new product. Like the early development of the cicada, this is where a lot of our work gets done. When a new medical product is developed, the first and foremost thing that a sponsor wants to know is how will FDA regulate that product. In order to determine how the product will be regulated, we must first answer 2 questions, and that will inform the regulatory paradigm that will be applied. First, what is it? And second, where does it go? To determine what a product is, we look to the definitions in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act for drugs and devices, and the Public Health Service Act for biological products, and then to both the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and 21 CFR 3.2e for identifying whether something is a combination product or not. Combination products are those things that are combinations of any two or more different types of drugs, devices, or biological products. So a drug-device combination, for example. We also occasionally have to consider whether something is a cosmetic, a dietary supplement, a medical food, or even just a regular food. And sometimes we'll even be asked questions about a product only to determine that it's not actually FDA regulated. For example, an insecticide product, which would fall under the authority of the Environmental Protection Agency. Once we've identified what a product is, we can determine which center will be the lead center for review of that product. For non-combination products, it's pretty straightforward. If something is a device, it goes to CDER-H, the Center for Devices. If something is a drug, it comes to CDER. And if it's a biological product, it goes to the Center for Biologics. Although there are a couple of big exceptions, such as devices that produce a biological product at the point of care. Those are regulated as devices in CDER. Also, CDER regulates some biological products like the therapeutic proteins and monoclonal antibodies. Now, if it's a combination product, there's an additional analysis that must be first done, and that is to determine the primary mode of action, or PMOA. Once you figure out what the constituent of the combination product provides the PMOA, then assignment is the same as with the single entity. So if the device provides the PMOA, it goes to CDER-H. Drug PMOA goes to CDER, and biological product PMOA goes to either CDER or CBER, depending on the type of biological product it is. What happens if you're still not sure? Well, you have a couple of different options, and I would recommend starting with the informal inquiry first. You can either direct that to the Office of Combination Products or to one of the PJOs. Either way, we'll coordinate among ourselves and get you an answer. Your next option would be to submit a pre-RFD or an RFD. This is a request for designation. Whichever you choose, please consider that you do it before you make a submission, because if you submit something incorrectly to the wrong place, or you think you know where it's going, but you weren't really right, we're actually going to need to stop the review clock and spend some time figuring out where the product belongs. Now, who does the PJO get questions from most often? You'll recall that I said that this is where a lot of our work is done, and so in a typical year, we respond to questions in the form of a request for designation, through inquiries directly to our office, inquiries from the CDER review divisions, from our Office of or Division of Drug Information to help them respond to an inquiry that they got to their office, as well as consulting on similar inquiries received by CDER-H. In a typical year, we probably see about 400 to 500 of these classification questions. Last year was actually a really unusual year because in addition to the normal inquiries we saw, we also fielded over 300 questions related to classification and assignment of products intended for the diagnosis, prevention, or treatment of COVID-19. Now, once you have sorted out what your product is and where it goes, you're ready to continue developing your product. But unlike the nymph stage of the cicada, you hopefully won't spend 17 years at this stage. For purposes of this presentation, I did lump a lot into this phase, though, including meetings with FDA for feedback on your development program, clinical studies, plans for submission of a marketing application. And so at this stage, the PJOs are still relatively active in the product development, but in a different way. During this phase of development, the PJOs are primarily interacting with CDER staff in one of three ways. First, there are often some remaining lingering questions about what a product is, whether it's a combination product or not. And like I mentioned earlier, there are times when a sponsor submits an application to the wrong center. The PJOs then help the staff to sort out those questions and get the product to the right place and under the right review paradigm. We also provide advice on whether additional submissions may be needed for certain combination products. This isn't usually the case, but it can happen, and other types of requirements, such as those related to good manufacturing practices for combination products. And finally, probably one of the bigger areas of interactions is through facilitation of the Intercenter Consult process. Let me say a little bit more about what that is. It's mainly for combination products, but also some non-combination products. The Intercenter Consult process provides a mechanism for CDER to consult other centers for their expertise and specific input on a matter. So while your drug-device combination product submission would be under the regulatory paradigm of CDER, the centers will still collaborate in the review of that combination product. As part of the process, the CDER PJO is involved in effectuating IT updates and ensuring staff resources such as system training is accessible. We also advise staff on who to consult, when to consult, and how to consult. Oftentimes it's a very straightforward process, but it can be more complicated, especially when a novel device is being introduced. And the Intercenter Consult process actually occurs throughout the life cycle of a combination product, both during product development phase, as well as during the marketing application review, and then even in the post-market phase. To ensure effective coordination and maintenance of the administrative record, the lead center still remains the primary contact for interactions with the sponsor and to facilitate any communications from the consulting center. And here is just a snapshot of Intercenter Consults over the last several years. In the top table, you can see that the total number of consults has steadily increased over a 5-year period. And if we look at the bottom table, you can see that in 2019, CDER sent by far the largest number of consults to another center, sending over 700 just to CDRH. Now, once you've made it through the nymph stage and you are ready to molt, you've made it to the pre-market development phase, and it's time for submission, review, and hopefully approval of a marketing application. Marketing applications in CDER are either the drug applications or the biological product licensing applications. On the drug side, the applications available are described in Section 505 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and include 505B1 applications, which involve a full report of safety and effectiveness. 505B2 applications are a full report of safety and effectiveness, but some data comes from studies not conducted by the applicant. Both 505B1 and 505B2 are called the NDA applications. Then 505J describes another application type, the abbreviated NDA, also known as the ANDA, for a generic drug. For these applications, the product must be identical in active ingredient, dosage form, use, route of administration, etc., to a previously approved product. Next, there are the biologic licensing applications for the biological products or the biological product-led combination products. This comes from Section 351A of the Public Health Service Act, or there's an option for a biosimilar product under Section 351K. Regardless of the type of application being submitted, CDER will still consult with CDRH for their expertise on the device constituent part of a drug or biologic-led combination product. And like with the pre-market development phase, the CDER PJOs are available to CDER staff to facilitate the consult process and advise on general combination product requirements. And just a quick note about user fees for combination products. There is no separate paradigm for a combination product. You simply pay the user fee of the type of application being submitted, and so it could be a PDUFA user fee, a GDUFA user fee, or a BSUFA user fee. Okay, at this point you have reached full growth and you're ready to make some noise when you hit the market. And for those of you who didn't have the pleasure of Brood X, let me tell you, it was loud. And I'm going to highlight really just one quick thing to think about once your product is on the market, although there's others. For purposes of today, I'm just going to mention the post-market safety reporting for combination products. While the post-market safety reporting regulations for drugs and devices share many similarities, each has a distinct requirement. And this is meant to ensure consistency and completeness but avoid duplication. And so a final rule was issued in 2016 and then codified in 21 CFR Part 4 and then finally described even further in guidance in July of 2019, describing how you can report post-market safety on combination products while ensuring that we are getting consistent and complete reports and you're not doing it duplicate to the extent feasible. And now I've taken you through the full life cycle of a product and the various touch points where the PJOs interact. But of course, there is a lot more going on, and you're still going to have questions about your combination product. So who should you ask? As a best practice, if the questions are about an application or a meeting request and they're product specific, you should always work through the lead center, for example, the RPM or your regulatory project manager, whoever your point of contact is assigned to that application. You can always request the Office of Combination Products and CDER Product Jurisdiction Officer participation in those questions that you're asking. However, if you have broad questions or more non-product specific questions, you can always contact the OCP or the CDER PJO, and we'll coordinate on getting you those questions and coordinate with the review division if needed as well to make sure that everybody's on the same page with respect to the questions you have and the answers that we're giving you to make sure that we're being as efficient and consistent as possible. Now, who's up for a challenge? And no, I don't mean trying some cicada cuisine. Thank goodness. Challenge question 1. If a sponsor or applicant is uncertain whether their product should be regulated as a drug or a device, who should they ask? A, CDER PJO, B, OCP. And the answer is both are correct. If a sponsor asks CDER PJO, we're going to confirm with OCP. And if a sponsor asks OCP, they're going to confirm with the CDER PJO. Either way, we'll get you the right answer. Challenge question 2. If you have an approved combination product in CDER, for example, an NDA for a drug-device combination product, who should you ask about the type of supplement needed for making a change to the device constituent of that combination product? A, OCP, B, CDER, or C, CDRH. The answer is ask CDER. The product is under an NDA, and CDER will decide the appropriate submission type. If it's an unusual request, CDER may coordinate with OCP and CDRH to ensure the submission type is commensurate with the type of review needed for that device change. However, you should always start with the lead center on this application-specific question. And that concludes my presentation for today. I will now take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lauritsen, for answering a lot of questions with your presentation. And we actually have a few more questions for you coming in from the audience right now. So if you're ready, we'll go ahead and get started with the first one. Dr. Lauritsen, if a sponsor does not agree with the classification of a combination product after submitting a request for designation, who should be contacted for resolution of the product classification?
Thank you. That's a great question. If you've received a response that you disagree with from the Office of Combination Products, there is an opportunity for doing what's called a request for reconsideration, which is also done through the Office of Combination Products. There are very specific timelines associated with that. They're outlined in 21 CFR Part 3, and they need to be, for example, an RFD decision is given within 60 days of the filing of the RFD. If the sponsor disagrees with the decision given, they have an additional 15 days in order to respond with that request for reconsideration. After that time, if they haven't submitted the request for reconsideration, or if they've submitted the request for reconsideration and still didn't get the response that they had hoped for, then they can enter the general 1075 appeal process, which elevates the decision to the next supervisory level above the Office of Combination Products.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Our next question, does the PJO provide classification evaluation to industry for dietary supplements or food along with drug, biologic, and medical devices?
This is also a really good question, and the answer is kind of, which isn't the greatest answer, but let me explain. Primarily, our responsibility is to answer questions about drugs, devices, biological products, and combination products. But some of those products kind of are in between the line of, is it a drug or is it a cosmetic, or is it a drug or is it a dietary supplement? And so in those situations, we actually will provide an opinion as to whether or not the claims that are being made associated with the product are therapeutic claims and thus drug claims, but we'll also consult with the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, or CFSAN, to ensure that we are looking at it consistently with the way they would look at something that is a cosmetic or a dietary supplement. So the ultimate decision is sometimes a joint decision between the two centers, with relying on the expertise in CFSAN for their regulatory oversight of cosmetics, food, and dietary supplements. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Another question for you. How binding is an informal inquiry outcome for a product designation? Is it a final decision or is it ever open to reassessment? Thanks.
So an RFD decision is binding, except in the cases of a public health reason to change the decision, or if the sponsor requests and agrees to a change, or the agency requests the sponsor change and the sponsor agrees. So it is binding except for in those two circumstances. I'll
Great,
also just add, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll also just add one little piece on that that occurs to me is that a sponsor may submit an RFD and for a specific product with a specific indication and get a binding decision. And then they may make a change to that product. They may change some of the ingredients, or they may change the indication so that instead of treating one type of wound, they're treating, a diabetic ulcer instead of just a regular paper cut, for example. That's an extreme example. Because the sponsor has changed their product in a way that changes the indication for use or has changed the composition of the product, then they are eligible to submit another RFD and seek a different decision on that specific product. So the RFD decisions are binding on the specific product at hand based on the design, composition, and indications for use of the product. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And more questions are coming in, so we'll go ahead and take a few more. If a Class 1 device, such as a measuring device, measuring syringe, is included with an oral solution, a drug, this would certainly be reviewed by CDER and not considered a combination therapy. Is that accurate?
Hey, thanks. Great question. So no, that is not accurate. If there is an oral syringe for delivering the medication, or a measuring cup that is provided with the medication, that is considered a combination product because the standalone oral syringe or the standalone measuring cup with measured markers is considered an oral medication delivery device. And there is a classification regulation for those things as devices. So when they're combined with a drug and provided in the same package with the drug for delivery, we do consider those to be drug device combination products.
Great, thank you. Another question for you. Does a sponsor need to get a formal RFD after a pre-RFD assessment? If not, are there any examples you can provide to to explain insights on why a pre-RFD might be preferable over a formal RFD.
Hi, so it is not necessary to get a formal RFD after getting a pre-RFD decision. It is sometimes desirable by the company just because they like to have that piece of paper that says that they have a formal binding decision, but it's absolutely not needed. If everyone is in agreement with the outcome of a pre-RFD, product development can proceed without the additional delay of waiting to do a formal RFD, which would add an additional 60 plus days to your time frame. The decision to submit an RFD versus a pre-RFD is a very individual decision, but in general, there is a little bit more flexibility built into the pre-RFD process because we don't have the binding timeframes associated with them. Under the formal RFD process, the agency must issue a decision in 60 days. There's no opportunity to pause the review clock and have some discussion with the sponsor. And in fact, it's actually very difficult to have any communications with the sponsor during the review of an RFD because of how little time we actually get to review it. In terms of ensuring that it's seen by the right subject matter experts, followed by the product jurisdiction officers, followed by the OCP subject matter experts, followed by the OCP regulatory counsel who is signing a letter. So a lot has to go on in that 60 days, and there's not a lot of time to talk with the sponsor. So a pre-RFD is often desirable because there is time for a little bit more iteration. There is some time to put a pause and schedule a teleconference and get some greater clarity from the sponsor on what is happening with their product. Those might be, times when you would consider the pre-RFD process.
Great, thanks for explaining that question. And another one we have about drug device combinations, and they want to know with PMOA as a drug, do they need to get a device component cleared by a 510K first?
That's a great question, and it depends a little bit on how the product is being configured. If the device component is something like a syringe that's going to be pre-filled with the drug, then there is no need or actually even an option to have a 510K for the device component first. The entire pre-filled syringe will be reviewed under the single marketing application, and CDER-H will be consulted with respect to the device constituent as part of that overall review. Now, there may be times when a more general use device is desired, and like, again, a syringe, which would have a general use indication that could get a 510K first and then become part of a co-package with a vial of drug. In those situations, the syringe would have gotten the 510K clearance first, and then the NDA application holder would refer to the 510K as part of their NDA application, explaining that they're going to take this 510K cleared device and co-package it with their drug. In those cases, we may ask a few additional questions just to ensure that there's, compatibility, or the way the shelf life hasn't changed from the 510K, for example, things like that. But in general, even in that case, it wouldn't be necessary to have a 510K first, only if that were the market choice of the sponsor putting those together. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And more questions? Another question for you. Can you explain when to request a combination product agreement meeting, or when to request a meeting via CDER, for example, a Type C meeting, when it's related to a combination product under CDER's jurisdiction?
Sure. So the combination product agreement meeting is a more formal meeting than a Type C meeting. I guess our guidance calls Type C meetings formal meetings too, but I mean that in the way that a CPAM results in a binding agreement between the agency and the sponsor on the basis of the questions being asked. It's appropriate to request a CPAM when you're ready to have that kind of binding decision and when you think that binding agreement is necessary. Oftentimes, it's really not necessary. A Type C meeting will answer all of the questions you have. You can ask all of the same questions in both types of meetings. With respect to a CPAM meeting, we would anticipate, though, that there would be more information provided so that we can come to agreement on the questions that are being asked in those meetings. And then anticipate that those agreements aren't going to change going forward. You will get the same type of advice in a Type C meeting and may not need to provide the same extent of information in order to get the same advice. So generally, a CPAM is really only necessary in limited circumstances where you feel that it's in utmost importance to have that binding agreement through that meeting. And it does offer some less flexibility going forward. Thanks.
Great, thank you for answering, and thanks to the audience for so many great questions. Our next one is a hyaluronic acid intra-articular injection still considered devices, or are they reviewed by CDER now?
That's a bit of a mixed answer. Hyaluronic acid intra-articular injections for the treatment of pain of osteoarthritis of the knee are generally going to be classified as drugs and are referred to CDER for their review. There are still approved device hyaluronic acid injection products under PMA and CDER-H. However, through a Federal Register notice issued a few years ago now, I forget exactly when, the agency identified that it had determined that hyaluronic acid intra-articular injections for osteoarthritis met the definition of a drug, but not the definition of a device, and therefore would be more appropriate for review by CDER. Sponsors who wish to develop and market a new hyaluronic acid injection are invited to either submit a request for designation or a pre-RFD to the Office of Combination Products, or to engage with CDER in a pre-IND and NDA type setting. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. And another product-specific question, what about a wound dressing kit? For example, a Band-Aid with an antibiotic. Could you explain your thoughts on that?
Hi, so this sounds like potentially two different questions. I'll try to answer them both. A wound dressing kit could be a box of Band-Aids with, or like a first aid kit with some, antibiotic, neosporin type of drug provided in there as a separate constituent. We do consider those types of wound dressing kits or like first aid kits to be combination products because they contain both device and drug constituent parts. Generally, those products don't require a pre-market review because they include Class 1 devices that don't require 510K and over-the-counter drugs that are under a monograph and don't require an NDA. So those can typically be marketed subject to, I believe it's CDER-H's kit policy on those. But a Band-Aid with an antibiotic could also mean a Band-Aid with antibiotic embedded in the gauze part of the Band-Aid. And again, those are also combination products because the Band-Aid is the device and the antibiotic for preventing infection is added and is treated as a drug.
Okay, great, thank you. And if someone is developing a drug-device combination product, but the drug is already approved on its own, if a company wants to talk about that, who should they contact to discuss the development of the device?
Thanks. So if a company is developing a drug device combination product and they want to leverage an approved drug to use with their device, that would still require a discussion with CDER, even though they want to talk about development of the device. And the reason for that is that for a combination product, all of the communications would go through the lead center. I apologize. I'm making an assumption that this is a drug delivery device. So if this is a drug delivery device, then that assumption is that the PMOA of that combination product, the primary mode of action, is attributable to the drug component, and therefore that product would be developed through CDER. So even though you're leveraging a drug that's already approved, and you just want to talk about development of the device, you're going to be talking really about the overall product development as a combination product, and that would go to CDER as the lead center. There may be some limited circumstances where you are developing a drug device combination product using an approved drug for which the device has the primary mode of action. And in those cases, the device primary mode of action combination products, you would go to CDER-H and talk about your device development and overall combination product development with CDER-H.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you. And another question, I think we have time for 2 more questions. Do all combination products need a request for designation?
No, all combination products do not need a request for designation, and in fact, most combination products do not need a request for designation. In most cases, it's abundantly clear that a product is a combination product and that the PMOA is either the drug or device, and we have lots of experience, and the company can simply proceed directly with their product development in whichever center is appropriate.
Okay, great. And our last question, does the CDER PJO or the Office of Combination Products make decisions about whether a combination product can be approved?
No, we do not. Those decisions are made on the basis of the review division and the subject matter experts for those types of products. The review team for a typical NDA will be making those decisions, and it will include reviewers from the Center for Devices or from the Center for Biologics, depending on the type of combination product it is. The role of the PJO in a product reaching its approval stage, or the role of OCP, is to ensure that the process is working, that any tricky policy or regulatory questions about how to apply a certain standard to a combination product can be addressed clearly, but the actual approval decision is not made by either OCP or the CDER PJO, and we're not involved in the scientific technical review of an application. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Lauritsen. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to explain this to us and to our audiences. And with that, we are going to go on a break.